Billionaire was preparing the divorce papers for his ex-wife to sign, until a call from the hospital changed everything. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. Alaric D'Amato adjusted his Italian silk tie as he stared at the pristine divorce documents spread across his mahogany desk. At 34, he had built a medical technology empire worth $3 billion, but the papers before him represented his greatest failure. His angular jaw clenched as his steel-gray eyes scanned the legal language that would officially end his marriage to Serafina Hale. The Manhattan penthouse office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, felt suffocating despite its grandeur. Alaric's 6'3" frame filled the leather chair perfectly, his broad shoulders tense beneath his custom-tailored charcoal suit. His dark hair, always impeccably styled, caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. 6 months. That's how long it had been since Serafina walked out of their Tribeca loft, her emerald eyes filled with disappointment rather than anger. The memory still stung more than any business defeat he'd ever faced. Mr. D'Amato, his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Your lawyer is here for the final review. Send him in, Alaric replied, his voice carrying the authority that commanded boardrooms, but had failed to save his marriage. Richard Blackstone entered, carrying a briefcase that contained the future Alaric never wanted. At 62, the divorce attorney had handled more high-profile separations than anyone in New York. His silver hair and expensive suit spoke of success, but his expression was unusually somber. These are ready for her signature, Richard said, placing the documents on the desk. The settlement is generous. The Hamptons house, half the art collection, and a sum that will ensure she never wants for anything. Alaric's fingers drummed against the desk. She didn't want any of it. They never do, until they realize what they're walking away from. But Richard was wrong about Serafina. At 29, she had built her own reputation as one of New York's most sought-after art restorers. Her delicate hands could bring centuries-old paintings back to life, coaxing color and beauty from damaged canvases with a patience that Alaric had never possessed. Her auburn hair, always pulled back in an elegant chignon while she worked, framed a heart-shaped face with porcelain skin that seemed to glow under gallery lights. She had never wanted his money. She had wanted him, the real him. Not the version he performed for investors, journalists, and social media followers. Not the carefully curated image of the perfect power couple that had become their public brand. She had wanted the man who used to bring her coffee at sunrise while she worked in her studio, who would hold her paint-stained hands and listen to her talk about the stories hidden in old masterpieces. But somewhere along the way, Alaric had forgotten how to be that man. The business had grown. The spotlight had intensified, and he had started sharing pieces of their private life like trading cards. Their anniversary dinner became Instagram content. Her quiet moments of artistic inspiration became anecdotes for magazine interviews. You're making our love into a performance, she had said during their last fight, her voice breaking. I feel like I'm living in a museum, where everything we do is for display. He had dismissed her concerns then, called them naive. Privacy was a luxury he couldn't afford in his position. His shareholders, his board, his investors, they all expected transparency, authenticity, access to the man behind the empire. But Serafina had seen it differently. I didn't marry your brand, Alaric. I married you, and I'm watching you disappear behind it. The pen felt heavy in his hand as he prepared to sign the documents. Once his signature was dry, a messenger would deliver them to Serafina's studio in Soho, and she would sign away 3 years of marriage and 5 years of love. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Alaric almost sent it to voicemail, but something made him answer. D'Amato. Is this Alaric D'Amato? The voice was professional, urgent. This is Dr. Sarah Chen from Mount Sinai Hospital. I'm calling about your wife, Serafina Hale. The pen slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the mahogany surface. What happened? Is she hurt? Mr. D'Amato, your wife is in labor. She's been brought to our maternity ward and... That's impossible. Alaric stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. There's some mistake. My wife isn't pregnant. Sir, she's in active labor at 26 weeks gestation. We need you here immediately. She's been asking for you. The divorce papers scattered as Alaric grabbed his coat, Richard's confused protests fading into background noise. Serafina, pregnant. It seemed impossible. She would have told him, wouldn't she? But as he raced through Manhattan traffic, his mind replayed the last few months before their separation, her fatigue which he had attributed to stress, the way she had started wearing looser clothing, her aversion to coffee, a change he had been too distracted to question. 26 weeks. That meant his hands gripped the steering wheel as the timeline hit him. The baby had been conceived during their last attempt at reconciliation, a weekend in the Hamptons where they had tried to rediscover each other away from the cameras and expectations. It had been tender, desperate, full of hope that they could find their way back to who they used to be. But it hadn't lasted. Within a month, they were fighting again about his decision to live stream their cooking attempt for a charity event, turning what should have been a private moment into content for his followers. Now, as Mount Sinai Hospital came into view, Alaric realized that while he had been preparing to end their marriage, Serafina had been carrying their child, alone, through all the hurt and disappointment, through their separation and the legal proceedings. She had been facing the most terrifying and beautiful experience of her life without him. The parking garage echoed with his footsteps as he ran toward the elevator. The divorce papers, forgotten on his desk, would have to wait. Everything would have to wait. Because somewhere in this hospital, the woman he had lost was fighting for the child he never knew existed. And for the first time in months, Alaric D'Amato, billionaire, CEO, master of his own destiny, had absolutely no idea what came next. Would you have tried to save a marriage when everything seemed lost? Or would you have signed those papers and walked away? The elevator seemed to move in slow motion as Alaric watched the floor numbers climb. 3rd floor, 4th, 5th. Each second felt like an eternity, his heart hammering against his ribs with a rhythm he couldn't control. The sterile hospital smell, disinfectant mixed with fear and hope, invaded his nostrils, bringing back memories of his father's final days in a similar place. But this was different. This was about life beginning, not ending. When the doors finally opened on the maternity ward, Alaric was greeted by a symphony of sounds he wasn't prepared for. The steady beeping of monitors, the soft cries of newborns, the hushed conversations of medical staff moving with practiced urgency. The fluorescent lighting cast everything in harsh relief, making the pale green walls seem almost sickly. "I'm looking for Serafina Hale," he said to the nurse at the reception desk, his voice rougher than intended. "I'm her husband." The nurse, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, looked up from her computer screen. "Room 314. Dr. Vance is expecting you. Down the hall. Take a left." Alaric's expensive leather shoes squeaked against the polished linoleum as he half walked, half ran down the corridor. Each step brought him closer to a reality he couldn't quite grasp. Serafina, pregnant. Their baby, fighting to survive at 26 weeks. The divorce papers that now seemed like artifacts from someone else's life. Room 314 stood before him, the door slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could hear the steady rhythm of a fetal heart monitor. Fast, strong, defiant. His hand trembled as he pushed the door open. Serafina lay in the hospital bed, her auburn hair dampened with sweat and spread across the pillow like spilled copper. Her face, usually composed and serene when she worked on her art, was flushed with exertion and pain. The monitor surrounding her bed told a story of struggle. Blood pressure elevated, contractions coming too fast, too early. But what struck Alaric most was how small she looked. At 5'6", Serafina had always carried herself with quiet confidence, her presence filling any room she entered. Now, dwarfed by medical equipment and wearing a hospital gown that made her skin look translucent, she seemed fragile in a way that made his chest tighten. Her emerald eyes found his across the room, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The anger, the hurt, the months of silence, none of it mattered in the face of what was happening. "Alaric!" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight that hit him like a physical blow. "You came." "Of course I came." He approached the bed carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter the moment. "Sarah, why didn't you tell me?" A contraction seized her then, and her face contorted with pain that made Alaric feel utterly helpless. Her hands gripped the bed rails, knuckles white with effort. He watched, powerless, as the woman who had once shared every thought with him suffered alone. When the contraction passed, she looked at him with eyes that held too much sadness for someone so young. "I didn't know. I swear, Alaric, I didn't know until this morning. I thought I was just stressed. The weight gain, the fatigue, I blamed it on everything falling apart between us." "Doctor?" Vance entered then, a woman in her early 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of steady presence that came from years of navigating medical crises. Her scrubs were pristine, but Alaric could see the tension in her shoulders. "Mr. D'Amato," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Vance, we need to talk." "How bad is it?" Alaric asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "Your wife is in preterm labor at 26 weeks. We've given her steroids to help develop the baby's lungs, and we're trying to slow the contractions, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "At this gestational age, every day matters. Every hour, really." Serafina made a small sound. Part fear, part determination. "What are the chances?" "With our NICU team, babies born at 26 weeks have about an 80% survival rate," Dr. Chen said. "But there can be complications, long-term challenges. We need to be prepared for a fight." Alaric felt the world shift beneath his feet. 6 hours ago, he had been preparing to end his marriage. Now he was facing the possibility of becoming a father to a child who might not survive their first day. "I want to stay," he said suddenly, looking at Serafina. "Whatever happens, I want to be here." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or hope. But before she could respond, another contraction hit. Stronger this time. Her back arched off the bed, and Alaric did the only thing he could think of. He took her hand. Her fingers closed around his with a strength that surprised him, as if she were drawing power from the connection. Her wedding ring, a simple band of white gold that he had chosen because it was understated and elegant like her, pressed against his palm. "Breathe, Sarah," he whispered, remembering something he'd read in a business article about stress management. "Breathe with me." For the next 20 minutes they breathed together through contractions that came with increasing frequency. Alaric found himself studying her face, memorizing details he had somehow forgotten during their months apart. The tiny scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the way her nose crinkled slightly when she was concentrating, the freckles across her cheekbones that were more visible now without makeup. When had he stopped noticing these things? When had he started seeing her as part of his public image instead of the woman who could spend hours explaining why a particular shade of blue in a Renaissance painting moved her to tears? "Mr. D'Amato," Dr. Chen said, returning with a team of nurses. "We need to move to delivery. The contractions are too strong to stop, and the baby's heart rate is showing signs of distress." The next few minutes blurred together in a chaos of movement. Serafina's bed was wheeled down hallways that seemed to stretch forever. Alaric found himself in scrubs that someone had thrust at him, following behind like a man in a dream. In the delivery room, surrounded by monitors and medical equipment that hummed with electronic life, Serafina gripped his hand so tightly he thought she might break his fingers. Her strength amazed him. This woman who handled priceless artworks with the gentlest touch was fighting with the fierce determination of a warrior. "I can see the head," Dr. Chen announced. "One more push, Serafina." And then, in a moment that would forever divide Alaric's life into before and after, he heard it, the thin, reedy cry of his child entering the world far too early, but alive and fighting. The baby was impossibly small. Alaric had seen newborns before, in movies, in the arms of business associates at company events, but nothing had prepared him for this. Their daughter, barely 2 pounds and translucent as morning mist, lay in an incubator that seemed to dwarf her tiny form. Wires and tubes connected to machines that beeped and whirred with mechanical precision, each sound a reminder of how precarious her hold on life truly was. "She's beautiful," Serafina whispered from her wheelchair, her voice hoarse from the delivery. The nurses had insisted she rest, but she'd refused to leave the NICU without seeing their daughter first. Alaric couldn't speak. His throat felt tight as he watched the rapid rise and fall of the baby's chest, each breath a small miracle. Her skin was so thin he could see the delicate network of blood vessels beneath, and her tiny fists were no bigger than his thumbnail. "Mr. and Mrs. D'Amato, Dr. Sarah Chen, the neonatologist, approached them with the kind of gentle authority that came from years of delivering difficult news to frightened parents. She was younger than Alaric expected, probably early 30s, with kind eyes that had seen too much joy and too much heartbreak. "I know this is overwhelming, but I need to explain what we're dealing with." Serafina reached for Alaric's hand, and he was surprised by how naturally their fingers intertwined. Despite everything, the separation, the hurt, the divorce papers still scattered on his office desk, this moment existed outside of their broken marriage. "Your daughter is stable for now," Dr. Chen continued, "but she's facing significant challenges. Her lungs aren't fully developed, which is why she's on the ventilator. We'll need to monitor her closely for signs of respiratory distress syndrome, potential infections, and developmental issues." "What does that mean?" Alaric asked, his business mind automatically seeking concrete information, timelines, outcomes. It means we take this one day at a time, Dr. Chen said softly. Sometimes 1 hour at a time. Premature babies are fighters, but they need time, time they should have had in the womb, to develop and grow strong enough to go home. Home. The word hung in the air between Alaric and Serafina like a question neither was ready to answer. Where was home now? The Tribeca loft that Serafina had left? The penthouse where Alaric had been signing divorce papers? Some new place neither of them could imagine yet? Can we touch her? Serafina asked, her voice breaking slightly. Dr. Chen nodded. There are ports in the incubator. She needs to feel your presence, hear your voices. Premature babies respond to their parents in ways we don't fully understand, but we know it helps. Alaric watched as Serafina carefully inserted her hand through the small opening, her fingers trembling as they gently stroked their daughter's arm. The baby was so small that Serafina's pinky finger was nearly the size of her tiny leg. "Hello, little one," Serafina whispered, and Alaric heard echoes of the woman who used to talk to damaged paintings as she brought them back to life. "I'm sorry we couldn't give you more time, but you're so brave. You're already so brave." The baby's heart rate monitor steadied, the beeping becoming more rhythmic. Even in her fragile state, she seemed to respond to her mother's voice. "Your turn," Serafina said, looking up at Alaric with tears in her eyes. Alaric hesitated. His hands, which could command boardrooms and close billion-dollar deals, suddenly felt too large, too clumsy for something so delicate. But Serafina's expectant gaze gave him courage. When his finger touched their daughter's palm, something extraordinary happened. The tiny hand, smaller than a watch face, closed around his finger with surprising strength. The grip was firm, determined, as if she were saying, "I'm here, I'm fighting." "She knows you," Dr. Chen observed with a small smile. "Babies can recognize their parents' voices from the womb. She's been listening to both of you for months." The weight of that statement hit Alaric like a physical blow. While he had been focused on his public image, on managing his empire and maintaining his reputation, their daughter had been growing inside Serafina, learning the sound of his voice through conference calls and board meetings, through the arguments that had driven them apart. "Has she heard us fighting?" he asked quietly, the thought horrifying him. "She's heard everything," Dr. Chen said gently, "but babies don't understand context the way we do. What matters now is what she hears going forward." A nurse approached. Melissa, according to her name tag, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of warm smile that suggested she'd been working with premature babies for years. "We need to discuss some practical matters," she said. "Your daughter will likely be in the NICU for several months. We encourage parents to spend as much time as possible here, participating in her care. Skin-to-skin contact, reading to her, playing music, these things make a real difference." "Several months?" Serafina repeated, as if the timeline hadn't quite registered before. "At minimum," Melissa confirmed. "Premature babies typically go home around their original due date. Your daughter wasn't due until January, so we're looking at a long journey." January. That was 4 months away. 4 months of this liminal space between hope and fear, between marriage and divorce, between the life they'd planned and the reality they now faced. "I'll be here," Alaric said suddenly, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Every day, however long it takes." Serafina stared at him, searching his face for something. Sincerity, maybe, or proof that this wasn't just another performance for an audience of medical professionals. "Alaric, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted, his gray eyes intense as they met hers. "She's our daughter, Sarah, and you're—" He paused, struggling with words that felt too big for the moment. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." For a moment, the only sounds in the NICU were the mechanical rhythms of life support machines and the distant cry of another premature baby somewhere in the unit. Serafina studied his face, and Alaric felt as though she were seeing past the public persona he'd built, straight through to the man who had once promised to love her in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. "What about your company?" she asked. "Your board meetings, your investors?" "They'll have to wait," he said, and meant it. "Some things are more important." It was the first time in years that Alaric had said those words, and actually believed them. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his assistant wondering where he was, or Richard asking about the divorce papers, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he kept his finger in their daughter's tiny grasp, feeling the steady beat of her heart through skin so delicate it seemed impossible that it could contain such fierce determination to live. Dr. Chen cleared her throat gently. "We should let Mom rest now. It's been a long day for everyone. As they prepared to leave the NICU, Alaric realized he didn't want to go. The outside world, with its contracts and obligations and carefully managed public image, felt foreign compared to this place where nothing mattered except the rhythm of tiny lungs learning to breathe. But as they walked toward the elevator, Serafina suddenly stopped. "Alaric," she said, her voice barely audible. "The divorce papers." He turned to face her, seeing his own confusion reflected in her emerald eyes. The papers that had seemed so final that morning now felt like relics from another lifetime. "What about them?" he asked. "What happens now?" The silence in Alaric's Tesla stretched between them like an unspoken negotiation. Serafina sat in the passenger seat, her hospital discharge papers folded neatly in her lap, her wedding ring catching the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windshield. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from emotional upheaval and the sudden weight of motherhood in a sterile hospital room. Alaric navigated the Manhattan traffic with unusual caution, hyper-aware of every bump and sudden stop. Everything felt different now, as if the world had shifted on its axis, and he was still learning to navigate this new landscape, where he was a father to a 2-pound fighter in an incubator. "Where are we going?" Serafina asked quietly, breaking the silence as they passed the exit that would lead to her Soho apartment. Alaric's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd been dreading this question since they left the hospital. "Your place is a 4th-floor walk-up," he said carefully. "Dr. Chen said you need rest. No stairs for at least 2 weeks. So what are you suggesting?" "The penthouse has an elevator, and it's closer to the hospital. Only 15 minutes instead of 40 in traffic." Serafina turned to study his profile, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his dark hair had fallen slightly out of its usual perfect arrangement. "Alaric, we can't just pretend the last 6 months didn't happen because of this. I'm not asking you to pretend anything," he said, pulling into the underground garage of his building. "I'm asking you to be practical. Our daughter is fighting for her life, and you just went through labor. You need to be close to the hospital, and you need help." The elevator ride to the 50th floor was even more awkward than the car ride. Alaric's penthouse had always been more showcase than home. All clean lines, expensive art, and windows that offered a commanding view of the city. It was the kind of space featured in architectural magazines. Beautiful, but cold. When the doors opened directly into his living room, Serafina stepped out hesitantly, as if she were entering a museum rather than a place where she'd once lived. "Everything's the same," she observed, running her fingers along the back of the Italian leather sofa, where they used to watch movies on Sunday mornings. "I couldn't change it," Alaric admitted, setting down the small bag of personal items the hospital had given them. "It still felt like you might come back." Serafina walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. "I can stay in the guest room," she said without turning around, "just until I'm cleared to climb stairs." "Sarah," he said her name like a question, like he was testing whether he still had the right to use the nickname that had once been his alone. She turned to face him, and Alaric was struck by how small she looked in the vast space of his living room. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore the same clothes she'd had on when the ambulance brought her to the hospital, a paint-stained sweater and jeans that now hung loose on her frame. "This is temporary," she said firmly, as if she needed to convince herself as much as him. We're not fixing anything just because we have a baby together. People co-parent all the time without being married." Alaric felt something sharp twist in his chest, but he nodded. "I understand." His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Board meeting moved to tomorrow. Richard called about papers. Where are you?" He silenced the phone without responding. "You should probably call your office," Serafina said, noticing his distraction. "Let them know what happened." Later, he pocketed the phone and moved toward the kitchen. "Are you hungry? I could order something." "Alaric." Her voice was gentle but firm. "You can't just stop your life because of this. Your company needs you. My company can survive without me for a few days." He opened the refrigerator, more to avoid her gaze than because he was actually looking for anything specific. "My daughter might not." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Serafina walked to the kitchen island, her fingers tracing the marble countertop where they used to sit together in the early mornings, sharing coffee and planning their days. "You called her my daughter," she said quietly. Alaric looked up from the refrigerator. "She is my daughter, but you said my, not our." He considered this, realizing she was right. Force of habit, I guess. In business, you learn to take ownership, to claim responsibility. He paused, studying her face. But she's ours, isn't she? Despite everything that's happened between us, she's ours. Serafina's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. I keep thinking about what Dr. Chen said. About her hearing us these past few months. All our fights, all the hurt. She also heard us laugh, Alaric said, moving around the island to stand closer to her. Remember that night in August when we tried to make pasta from scratch and ended up ordering pizza? A small smile tugged at the corners of Serafina's mouth. You got flour everywhere. You took pictures? I deleted them after we separated. The admission stung, but Alaric understood. He'd deleted photos too, unable to bear the reminders of what they'd lost. His phone rang, Richard's ringtone. Alaric declined the call. You can't avoid him forever, Serafina said. The divorce papers are the least of my concerns right now. Alaric's voice was firmer than he intended. Sarah, 6 hours ago I was ready to sign those papers and walk away from us forever. Now we have a daughter fighting for her life. And you're here, in our home. It's not our home anymore, she corrected gently. It's your home, I'm just visiting. Then why does it feel right for the first time in months? The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Serafina looked away, focusing on the city lights beginning to twinkle outside the windows as evening approached. We should go back to the hospital, she said finally. Dr. Chen said they do rounds at 8, and I want to be there. Alaric nodded, grateful for the reprieve from the conversation they weren't ready to have. I'll drive you. We'll drive together, she corrected, and something in the way she said, we, made Alaric's heart skip. As they prepared to leave, Alaric's phone buzzed with another text from Richard. Divorce papers still on your desk. Serafina's lawyer called asking about timeline. What should I tell them? Alaric stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some questions didn't have answers yet. Some decisions couldn't be rushed, especially when there was a tiny life hanging in the balance, changing everything they thought they knew about their future. Ready? Serafina asked from the doorway. Alaric pocketed his phone and joined her, noting how natural it felt to place his hand on the small of her back as they walked to the elevator. But as the doors closed and they descended toward the garage, he wondered if they were going up to see their daughter, or down into a complicated future neither of them could predict. The NICU at night was a different world. The harsh fluorescent lights had been dimmed to a soft amber glow, and the usual bustle of daytime medical activity had settled into the quiet vigilance of night shift nurses moving like shadows between the incubators. Alaric sat in the uncomfortable reclining chair beside their daughter's isolette, his expensive suit jacket draped over the back, his tie loosened for the first time in recent memory. Serafina occupied the chair next to him, her legs curled under her despite the nurse's instructions to keep her feet elevated. She'd been reading to their daughter from a book of poetry she'd found in the hospital's family library, something about the rhythm of verse being soothing to premature babies. Her oxygen levels have been stable all evening, Nurse Melissa said softly as she checked the monitors. That's a very good sign for day one. Day one. Alaric couldn't wrap his mind around the fact that this morning he'd woken up believing his marriage was over, and now he was a father watching his daughter fight for every breath through a ventilator. After Melissa left, the silence between them grew heavy. Alaric found himself studying Serafina's profile in the dim light, noticing things he'd somehow missed during their marriage. The way she unconsciously touched her wedding ring when she was anxious, the small constellation of freckles behind her left ear that only showed when her hair was pulled back, the graceful curve of her neck that had once been his favorite place to rest his head when they shared lazy Sunday mornings. I need to tell you something, Serafina said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Alaric's attention snapped to her fully. Something in her tone made his chest tighten with apprehension. She kept her eyes on their daughter as she spoke. The night I left. The real reason I left wasn't just about the privacy thing. What do you mean? Serafina's hands twisted in her lap, and Alaric noticed they were trembling slightly. There was a phone call, 3 months before I moved out, from a woman named Isabella Torres. The name hit Alaric like a physical blow. Isabella, his business partner in the Madrid expansion, the brilliant biotech engineer who'd helped him navigate the European markets. Beautiful, sophisticated, and exactly the kind of woman who looked perfect on his arm at international conferences. Sarah, let me finish. Her voice was steady, but Alaric could see the tears gathering in her eyes. She called our home number at midnight on a Tuesday when you were supposedly in Chicago for that medical device conference. Alaric's mind raced. trying to remember the timeline, the conference, what he'd actually been doing that Tuesday night. The Chicago conference had been moved to the following week, but he hadn't told Serafina because he'd been using the time to work on a surprise, an acquisition of a small art restoration company he'd planned to give her for their anniversary. She said she was calling to thank you for the flowers. Serafina continued, her voice growing smaller with each word. Red roses, delivered to her hotel room in Madrid with a note that said, "Can't wait to see you again." The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. The flowers had been a congratulatory gesture for Isabella's promotion to lead engineer on the European project. The note had been about their scheduled business meeting the following month. But hearing it through Serafina's interpretation, understanding how it must have sounded to his wife, "Sarah, look at me." He leaned forward, his hand reaching for hers, but she pulled away. I tried to convince myself it was innocent, but then I started noticing things. How you'd light up when you talked about the Madrid project, how you'd take calls from her in another room, how you seemed happier when you were working with her than when you were home with me. That's not... And then the next week you posted that photo on Instagram, the one from the Barcelona conference with Isabella. You had your arm around her, both of you laughing at some private joke, and the caption said, "Great partnerships make great innovations." Serafina finally looked at him, and the pain in her emerald eyes was devastating. I felt like such a fool. There you were, sharing your joy with the whole world, and I was at home wondering if my marriage was falling apart. Alaric felt sick. He remembered the photo. It had been taken after they'd successfully closed a major deal with a Barcelona-based medical research facility. Isabella had been instrumental in the negotiations, and the celebration had been purely professional, but he'd never considered how it might look to Serafina, already feeling displaced by his increasing public exposure of their private life. "I never had an affair," he said quietly, but firmly. "Not with Isabella, not with anyone." "I know." The admission seemed to surprise them both. "You know?" Serafina nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I hired a private investigator. I'm not proud of it, but I needed to know. He followed you for 6 weeks and found nothing. No secret meetings, no romantic dinners, no hotel rooms, just work. Always just work. Then why didn't you—" "Because that almost made it worse," she said, her voice breaking. "If you'd been having an affair, I could have been angry. I could have rightfully hated you. But you weren't cheating. You were just choosing your work over me, choosing your public image over our private intimacy, and somehow that felt like a different kind of betrayal." The monitors around their daughter continued their steady beeping, a reminder that life was hanging in the balance while they excavated the ruins of their marriage. Alaric stared at the isolette, watching their tiny daughter's chest rise and fall with mechanical assistance, and felt the full weight of his failures as a husband. "The art restoration company," he said finally, "in Prague. I was trying to acquire it for you, as a surprise for our anniversary. That's why I was taking calls from Isabella in other rooms. She was helping me navigate the international business laws." Serafina's head snapped up. "What?" "I wanted to give you your own company. Complete autonomy, unlimited budget for restoration projects, everything you'd ever dreamed of. I thought—" He ran his hands through his hair, destroying what was left of his perfect styling. "I thought if I could give you the perfect gift, if I could show you how much I supported your career, you'd forgive me for all the publicity stuff." "Alaric." Her voice was soft, confused. "I never wanted my own company. I wanted my husband." The simple truth of it hit him like a sledgehammer. While he'd been orchestrating grand gestures and building business empires to prove his love, she'd been drowning in loneliness, feeling increasingly invisible in their marriage, except when she was needed as a photogenic accessory to his success. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of his blindness. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I thought I was building us a future, but I was destroying our present." She reached through the isolette's port to touch their daughter's tiny hand. "She's going to need both of us," she said quietly. "Whatever happens between us, she's going to need both her parents." "What if—" Alaric hesitated, afraid to voice the hope that was growing in his chest. "What if we could find a way back? Not to who we were, but to who we could be?" Serafina was quiet for so long that Alaric thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't know if I can trust you again. Not with my heart." The honesty was brutal but somehow also hopeful. She wasn't saying no. She was saying she didn't know. And for a man who'd spent the morning signing divorce papers, Not knowing felt like a gift. Their daughter's monitor beeped, indicating a slight change in her oxygen levels. Both parents leaned forward instinctively, but the numbers stabilized quickly. False alarm. "She's strong," Serafina said, and Alaric wasn't sure if she was talking about their daughter or herself. Outside the NICU windows, Manhattan glittered in the darkness, a city that never slept but somehow felt quieter from this vantage point. Here, surrounded by machines that measured heartbeats and breath, everything else seemed distant and strangely unimportant. Alaric's phone buzzed with yet another message from Richard about the divorce papers, but for the first time in his professional life, he turned it off completely without reading it. The call came at 3:47 a.m. Alaric jerked awake in his home office chair, where he'd fallen asleep reviewing quarterly reports while Serafina rested in the guest room. His phone's shrill ring cut through the silence like a blade, and the caller ID made his blood run cold. Mount Sinai Hospital. "Mr. D'Amato, doctor." Chen's voice was carefully controlled, but Alaric could hear the tension beneath her professional calm. "We need you and your wife here immediately. Your daughter is experiencing complications." The world tilted. What kind of complications? "Her oxygen levels have dropped significantly, and we're seeing signs of potential infection. We're doing everything we can, but you should come now." Alaric was moving before he consciously decided to, his bare feet hitting the cold hardwood as he rushed toward the guest room. "Sarah," he called softly, pushing the door open to find her already sitting up, her hair tousled from sleep, eyes wide with the intuitive fear that only mothers seem to possess. "The hospital?" she asked, already reaching for the clothes she'd laid out on the chair beside her bed. "We have to go. Now." The drive through empty Manhattan streets felt endless despite the lack of traffic. Serafina sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Neither of them spoke, but the silence was filled with unspoken fears that grew larger with each passing block. When they reached the NICU, the scene was controlled chaos. Their daughter's isolette was surrounded by medical personnel, machines beeping with urgent frequency. "Doctor." Chen looked up as they approached, her face grave. "What's happening?" Serafina's voice was steady, but Alaric could see her whole body trembling. "She's developed necrotizing enterocolitis, NEC," Dr. Chen explained quickly. "It's a serious intestinal condition that affects premature babies. We've started antibiotics, but she may need surgery." Surgery? On a 2-pound baby who was still fighting for every breath. Alaric felt his legs go weak, but Serafina stepped forward with surprising strength. "What are her chances?" she asked with the directness that had once intimidated his business associates. "If we operate quickly, good. But there are risks with any surgery on a baby this premature. We need your consent." The next hour blurred together in a haze of medical explanations, consent forms, and the terrible helplessness of watching their daughter disappear behind operating room doors. Alaric and Serafina found themselves in the family waiting room, a sterile space with uncomfortable chairs and magazines no one could concentrate on reading. "Mr. D'Amato?" A woman's voice interrupted the silence. Alaric looked up to see a young reporter he recognized from TechCrunch standing in the doorway, flanked by a photographer. "I'm Jessica Morrison. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about the rumors." "Get out." Alaric's voice was deadly quiet as he stood, his body positioning itself protectively between the reporter and Serafina. "Sir, I just wanted to confirm whether it's true that you and your wife have reconciled after—" "I said get out." This time his voice carried the full weight of his authority, the tone that had cowed competitors and silenced boardrooms. The reporter took a step back, but the photographer raised his camera. The flash exploded in the small waiting room, capturing what would later become a viral image. Alaric D'Amato, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled from sleeping in a chair, his face a mask of protective fury as he shielded his estranged wife in a hospital waiting room. Security arrived within minutes, escorting the journalists out, but the damage was done. Alaric's phone immediately began buzzing with notifications. The photo was already spreading across social media, spawning speculation about his marriage, his business, his future. "How did they even know we were here?" Serafina asked, her voice hollow. Alaric stared at his phone as notifications continued to flood in. Someone had leaked the information. But who? The hospital staff were bound by confidentiality. His assistant didn't know about the baby. Unless— "Richard," he said quietly, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "What?" "My lawyer, Richard Blackstone." He's been calling constantly about the divorce papers, and his firm has connections with several gossip columnists. If he thought the delay was hurting his reputation, Serafina's face went pale. You think he told them? Before Alaric could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID confirmed his worst fears. You son of a bitch, Alaric answered without preamble. Alaric, I can explain. Richard's voice was defensive, confirming everything. You leaked information about my wife and newborn daughter to the press? You weren't returning my calls. The divorce papers have been sitting on your desk for 18 hours, and my firm has a reputation to maintain. When sources started asking questions about delays in high-profile cases, Alaric hung up and immediately dialed his head of security. Marcus, I need Richard Blackstone banned from all my properties, effective immediately, and I want to know exactly who he's been talking to. Alaric. Serafina's voice was quiet but firm. This is exactly what I was afraid of. He turned to face her, seeing the old pain mixed with fresh hurt in her emerald eyes. Even here, she continued, gesturing to the waiting room where their daughter was fighting for her life. Even in the most private, sacred moment of our lives, your public persona follows us. Someone always has a camera, always has questions, always wants a piece of our story to sell. Sarah, I know you didn't call them. Her voice was tired, defeated. But this is what your life is like. This is what being married to you means. And I can't protect our daughter from this if I'm married to you. The words hit him like a physical blow. She wasn't just talking about their marriage anymore. She was talking about custody, about a future where he might be relegated to weekend visits and supervised exchanges to keep their daughter out of the spotlight. You can't be serious. Look around, Alaric. Look at where we are. She gestured to the waiting room where the smell of disinfectant couldn't quite mask the lingering scent of camera flash and intrusion. Our daughter isn't even a day old, and she's already part of your brand. By tomorrow, there will be think pieces about our marriage, speculation about her birth weight, probably betting pools about whether we'll reconcile. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, still in her surgical scrubs, and both parents immediately stood. The surgery went well, she said, and Alaric felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. We were able to remove the affected intestinal tissue, and she's stable, but the next 48 hours are critical. Can we see her? Serafina asked. Soon. She's in recovery now, but Dr. Chen's expression grew troubled. I have to ask, were those reporters here about your daughter's condition? Because if medical information has been leaked? No, Alaric said quickly. It was about our personal situation. Our separation. Dr. Chen nodded, but her concern was evident. I need to remind you both that your daughter's medical information is strictly confidential, but I can't control what happens outside these walls. After she left, Alaric and Serafina stood in the hallway, the weight of unspoken decisions hanging between them. His phone continued to buzz with calls from his board members, his PR team, business journalists wanting statements about his future plans. I'll resign, he said suddenly. Serafina looked at him in shock. What? From the company. I'll step down as CEO, sell my shares, whatever it takes. I'll disappear from public life completely. Alaric, you can't. Yes, I can. His voice was firm, certain. I built that company, but I can walk away from it. I can't walk away from her. From both of you. Serafina stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Sincerity, maybe. Or proof that this wasn't just another grand gesture designed to win her back. You'd really do that? Give up everything you've worked for? It's not everything, he said quietly, looking toward the recovery room where their daughter was fighting to survive her second day of life. It's not even close to everything. For a moment, hope flickered in Serafina's eyes, but then her phone buzzed with a notification, and the hope died as quickly as it had appeared. She showed him the screen. The photo from the waiting room was trending on Twitter with the hashtag Dang's Billionaire baby drama. It's too late, she whispered. Even if you walked away now, she'd still be Alaric D'Amato's daughter. She'd still be a target, a story, a commodity for people to discuss and dissect. And as they stood in the sterile hospital hallway, watching strangers on social media speculate about their newborn daughter's future, Alaric realized that some mistakes couldn't be undone, no matter how much money or power you were willing to sacrifice. 3 weeks had passed since their daughter's surgery, and the routine had become both comforting and suffocating. Alaric arrived at the hospital each morning at 7, brought Serafina coffee exactly how she liked it, 2 sugars, extra cream, and they spent their days in the uncomfortable chairs beside their daughter's isolette, watching monitors and celebrating tiny victories like weight gain measured in ounces. Their daughter, whom they'd finally named Evangeline after Serafina's grandmother, was thriving. Her lungs were stronger. Her weight was climbing toward 3 pounds, and the doctors spoke cautiously of hope. But outside the NICU's protective walls, their world was crumbling. The media attention had intensified rather than faded. Paparazzi waited outside the hospital, camped outside Alaric's building, and somehow had discovered the location of Serafina's Soho apartment. Her art studio had been broken into by photographers looking for intimate glimpses of the estranged Mrs. D'Amato's private creative space. Alaric had indeed resigned as CEO, appointing his COO Marcus Sterling to take over operations. But the move had only fueled more speculation about his mental state, his marriage, and his business acumen. Stock prices fluctuated with each new rumor about his personal life. "We can't keep living like this," Serafina said quietly, not looking up from the book she was reading to Evangeline. It was Thursday afternoon, and the NICU was quieter than usual. "She's going to be able to come home in a few weeks, and then what?" Alaric looked up from his laptop, where he'd been fielding emails from board members concerned about the company's direction. "What do you mean?" "I mean, where is home? Your penthouse is surrounded by photographers. My apartment building has been compromised. And wherever we go, whatever we do, it's going to be documented and analyzed and turned into content for strangers to consume." Before Alaric could respond, his phone buzzed with a call from Marcus Sterling. He almost declined it, but Marcus had been respectful of his family time, only calling with truly urgent matters. "I have to take this," he said apologetically. "Alaric," Marcus's voice was tense. "We have a problem. A big one." "What now?" "Isabella Torres. She's called a press conference for tomorrow morning. She's claiming that you promised her your shares in the European division in exchange for sexual favors, and that when she refused, you fired her and destroyed her reputation." The words hit Alaric like a physical blow. "That's completely false. I know that, you know that, but she has emails. Doctored ones probably, but convincing. And her lawyers are very good." Alaric closed his eyes, feeling the walls closing in around him. Isabella had been increasingly difficult since he'd stepped down as CEO, making demands about her position in the company that were unreasonable and unprofessional. When Marcus had declined to promote her to chief European officer, a position she wasn't qualified for, she'd become hostile. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that the board is calling an emergency meeting. Some of them are suggesting we should distance the company from you entirely." Serafina had stopped reading and was watching Alaric's face with growing concern. She couldn't hear Marcus's words, but she could read the tension in Alaric's expression. "I'll be there," Alaric said. But as he spoke, he was looking at Serafina, seeing the exact moment when her face went from concern to resignation. "Alaric," Marcus continued, "there's something else. The press conference isn't just about the sexual harassment allegations. She's also claiming that you told her about Serafina's pregnancy before Serafina knew, and that you were planning to leave your wife to start a family with her." Jesus Christ. Alaric ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that had become habitual over the past 3 weeks. "Marcus, none of this is true, not a single word. I believe you, but I have to go." Alaric ended the call and turned to face Serafina, who had gone very still. "Let me guess," she said quietly. "Isabella Torres has something to say about your relationship." "It's all lies, Sarah. Everything she's claiming, I don't care if it's lies." Serafina's voice was calm, but Alaric could see the tremor in her hands as she closed the book. "I care that it's happening at all. I care that our daughter is going to grow up in a world where strangers can make up stories about her father and broadcast them to millions of people." "Sarah, please." "No." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "I can't do this anymore, Alaric. I thought maybe we could find a way through this, but it never ends. There's always going to be another crisis, another scandal, another person trying to use your name, our name, to get attention or money or revenge." She moved toward Evangeline's isolette, placing her hand gently against the clear plastic. Their daughter was sleeping peacefully, tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack of their days. "Look at her," Serafina whispered. "She's so perfect, so innocent. And already, before she's even strong enough to breathe on her own, she's being dragged into this circus." "We can protect her," Alaric said desperately. "We can move somewhere private, change our names if necessary. You can't change who you are, Alaric. You're Alaric D'Amato. You built an empire, you changed the medical technology industry. You're worth billions of dollars. That doesn't just disappear because you want it to." A nurse approached, Linda, one of their favorites, who'd been caring for Evangeline since her first day. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said quietly, "but visiting hours are ending soon." Serafina nodded, then turned back to Alaric. "I've made a decision." Something in her tone made Alaric's blood run cold. "What kind of decision?" "I'm taking Evangeline to Portland when she's discharged. My aunt has a house there, far from all this. I'm going to raise her away from the cameras and the speculation and the constant invasion of privacy. You can't just take my daughter to another state. She's our daughter, and I'm trying to protect her." Serafina's voice was steady, but tears were streaming down her face. "I'm trying to give her the kind of childhood where she can ride bikes and play in parks and go to school without bodyguards and NDAs and photographers hiding in bushes. Sarah, we can work this out. We can find a solution that works for all of us." She shook her head, and Alaric saw something break in her expression. "There is no solution, Alaric. Don't you see? This is who you are. This is the life you chose, the empire you built. And I love you. God help me. I still love you, but I love her more." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Around them, the NICU continued its quiet symphony of beeps and hums, but Alaric felt as though the world had gone silent. "You're not just taking her away from the media," he said quietly. "You're taking her away from me." "No," Serafina said, reaching for his hand. "I would never keep you from your daughter, but visitation will have to be on my terms in Portland. Away from all this. Away from the photographers and the scandals and the people who think your personal life is their entertainment." Alaric stared down at their joined hands, noting how small hers looked in his, how the simple gold band on her finger caught the harsh hospital lighting. "What about us?" "There is no us, Alaric. There hasn't been for a long time." She squeezed his hand once, then let go. "Tomorrow I'm signing the divorce papers." She leaned over Evangeline's isolette, pressing a kiss to her fingertips and then touching them gently to their daughter's forehead. "Mommy loves you, little angel. We're going to be okay." As she walked toward the exit, Alaric called after her. "Sarah, wait." She paused in the doorway but didn't turn around. "What if I could make it all disappear? What if I could find a way to make Isabella's allegations go away? To get the media to leave us alone? To give us the privacy you want?" Serafina did turn then, and the sadness in her eyes was devastating. "How, Alaric? How could you possibly make it all disappear?" And as she walked away, leaving him alone with their sleeping daughter and the weight of an impossible question, Alaric realized he didn't have an answer, but he had something else. A dangerous idea that could either save his family or destroy what was left of his life. Alaric hadn't slept in 36 hours, but his mind had never been clearer. Sitting in his penthouse office at 4 a.m., surrounded by laptops, legal documents, and empty coffee cups, he was orchestrating the most complex negotiation of his life, one that could either save his family or cost him everything he'd ever built. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane, but desperate times called for desperate measures, and Alaric D'Amato had become a desperate man. His first call was to Viktor Kozlov, a Russian oligarch whose medical device company had been trying to acquire D'Amato Technologies for 3 years. Viktor was ruthless, efficient, and most importantly, he understood the value of privacy. His own business dealings were conducted far from public scrutiny. "Mr. D'Amato," Viktor's accent was thick despite the early hour. "This is unexpected. My sources tell me you're having some difficulties. I'm calling to accept your offer," Alaric said without preamble. "All of it. The full acquisition, the complete buyout, everything." Silence on the other end of the line. Viktor had offered $4.2 billion for the company, a fair price that would make Alaric one of the wealthiest private citizens in America, while removing him entirely from corporate leadership. "You were quite adamant that your company was not for sale. Circumstances change. I want the deal closed within 72 hours. "Impossible. The regulatory approvals alone. I've already spoken with Senator Martinez about fast-tracking the antitrust review. I've prepared all the necessary documentation. Viktor, I'm offering you the deal of a lifetime on the condition that it happens immediately." Another pause. "What's the catch, Alaric?" "No catch. But I have 3 non-negotiable conditions. First, my current management team stays in place. Second, the D'Amato name comes off everything. Buildings, products, patents, I want to disappear from the business entirely. And third, you provide me with your best security team and a completely private compound where my family and I can live without any media intrusion." "You're asking me to help you vanish." "I'm asking you to help me protect my family." At 6 a.m., Alaric was in his lawyer's office, not Richard's, who he'd fired permanently, but Catherine Walsh, a fierce woman who specialized in crisis management for high-profile clients. Catherine had short silver hair, steel-rimmed glasses, and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that had made her legendary in legal circles. "This is either brilliant or completely insane," she said, reviewing the contracts Alaric had drafted. "You're essentially committing financial suicide to solve a personal problem. The money doesn't matter if I lose my family. Alaric, even if this works, even if you can make yourself disappear from public life, Serafina might not take you back. She's made her decision. Then at least Evangeline will grow up with her father in her life, even if her parents aren't together." Catherine studied his face over her glasses. "You realize that once you sign these papers, once you transfer ownership of your company and liquidate your public assets, there's no going back? You'll be walking away from 15 years of work. 15 years of building the wrong life," Alaric corrected. "I thought success meant everyone knowing my name. Now I realize success means being able to live quietly with the people you love." At noon, Alaric was at Mount Sinai, but not in the NICU. Instead, he was in a conference room with Dr. Chen, the hospital's board of directors, and his legal team, finalizing the largest private donation in the hospital's history. $50 million for a new wing dedicated to neonatal care, Dr. Chen repeated, as if she couldn't quite believe the numbers. "Mr. D'Amato, this is extraordinarily generous. There are conditions," Alaric said. "The wing will be completely private. No media access, no public tours, no publicity of any kind. Families dealing with premature births will have absolute privacy during the most difficult time of their lives. And the donation is anonymous. My name doesn't go on any plaques or buildings." One of the board members frowned. "Mr. D'Amato, donors typically want recognition for gifts of this magnitude. I want the opposite of recognition. Can you guarantee complete anonymity?" "We can," Dr. Chen said quietly, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. "But may I ask why?" "Because some things are more important than credit." At 3 p.m., Alaric was in Isabella Torres's lawyer's office, facing the woman who had been trying to destroy his reputation. Isabella sat across from him, perfectly composed in a charcoal business suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her angular face look even more predatory. "Alaric," she said with false warmth, "I didn't expect you to come personally. I came to make you an offer," Alaric said, sliding a document across the table. $10 million. Cash. In exchange for a complete retraction of your allegations and a signed NDA that prevents you from ever discussing our professional relationship again. Isabella's lawyer, a thin man with nervous energy, looked up from the document. "This is substantial, but my client's reputation has been damaged by—" "Your client's reputation will be completely destroyed when I release the recordings," Alaric interrupted quietly. Isabella's composure cracked for the first time. "What recordings?" "Every meeting we ever had was recorded, Isabella. It's standard practice for all my business interactions, including the meeting where you explicitly threatened to make me pay when I didn't promote you to Chief European Officer." He placed his phone on the table and played a brief audio clip. Isabella's voice crystal clear, saying, "If you think you can humiliate me like this and walk away, you're wrong. I'll destroy your reputation, your marriage, everything you care about." The color drained from Isabella's face. "That was taken out of context." "Perhaps. But context is subjective, isn't it? Just like your allegations against me." Alaric stood up. $10 million, Isabella. More money than you'll make in 5 lifetimes. Take it and disappear, or I release everything and let the courts decide who's telling the truth." 20 minutes later, Isabella Torres signed the retraction. At 6 p.m., Alaric was back at the hospital, but this time he went straight to the NICU. Serafina was there, as he'd known she would be, reading to Evangeline from a book of children's poems. She looked up when he entered, her expression guarded. "I thought you were dealing with the Isabella situation," she said quietly. "I did deal with it. It's over." "What do you mean, over?" Alaric pulled up a chair beside her, noting how Evangeline seemed to recognize his presence, her tiny hand moving toward the sound of his voice. Isabella retracted her allegations completely, publicly. She issued a statement saying she made everything up out of professional jealousy, and she's agreed to never discuss our business relationship again. Serafina stared at him. "How did you manage that?" "I paid her $10 million to go away forever." "Alaric, you can't just throw money at every problem." "That's not all." He took a deep breath, knowing that what he said next would change everything. I sold the company, Sarah, all of it. Viktor Kozlov bought D'Amato Technologies for $4.2 billion, and as of this afternoon, I no longer have any connection to it. Serafina's book slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. You... what? I also donated $50 million to build a completely private wing for families with premature babies. No media access, no publicity, complete anonymity. And I've purchased a compound in Montana, 2,000 acres, completely isolated, where we can raise Evangeline without anyone bothering us. Alaric, stop. Serafina's voice was shaking. You can't dismantle your entire life because I threatened to leave. I'm not dismantling my life, he said softly, reaching for her hand. I'm finally building the right one. But even as he spoke, Alaric's phone was buzzing with notifications. The news of D'Amato Technologies' sale was already breaking, and with it would come a new wave of media attention, speculation about his motives, questions about his mental state and his marriage. Serafina noticed the notifications too, her face falling as she realized that even his grand gesture couldn't escape the spotlight that seemed to follow them everywhere. The media storm that followed the sale of D'Amato Technologies was unlike anything Alaric had experienced before. By the next morning, every major news outlet was running stories about the billionaire's breakdown, speculating wildly about his motives, his mental health, and his marriage. The hospital had to post additional security guards to keep reporters from sneaking into the maternity ward. Serafina hadn't spoken to him since his revelation about selling the company. She'd listened to his explanations in stunned silence, then quietly asked him to leave so she could think. That was 18 hours ago. And Alaric was beginning to understand that his grand gesture might have been the final proof that their problems couldn't be solved with money or dramatic actions. Dr. Chen found him in the family lounge at dawn, staring out the window at the photographers gathered on the street below like vultures waiting for carrion. Your daughter is doing exceptionally well, she said, settling into the chair beside him. We're talking about discharge in 10 days, maybe sooner. That's good news. It should be. Dr. Chen studied his profile. But you don't look like a man celebrating his daughter's recovery. Alaric laughed bitterly. I thought I could fix everything. Eliminate the obstacles, remove the complications, create a perfect environment for my family. But I'm starting to realize that maybe I am the complication. May I speak candidly? He nodded. I've been working with premature babies and their families for 12 years, Dr. Chen said. I've seen every kind of crisis, medical, financial, emotional, and I've learned that the families who succeed aren't the ones who try to control everything. They're the ones who learn to adapt, to be present, to focus on what actually matters instead of what they think should matter. What's your point, doctor? My point is that your wife doesn't need you to be perfect. She needs you to be real. And all these grand gestures, selling your company, buying properties, throwing money around, they're still performance. They're still you trying to manage and control the narrative instead of just being her partner. Before Alaric could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something made him answer. Mr. D'Amato, this is Detective Rebecca Santos with the NYPD. I'm calling about an incident involving your wife. Alaric's blood went cold. What kind of incident? A photographer got too aggressive this morning outside your wife's apartment building. Apparently she was retrieving some personal items when he blocked her path and wouldn't let her pass. She threw a can of paint at him. Under any other circumstances, Alaric might have laughed at the image of elegant, composed Serafina wielding art supplies as weapons, but the situation was too serious for humor. Is she hurt? Is she in trouble? She's fine, but the photographer is threatening to press charges for assault. We've got her at the precinct for questioning. She asked me to call you. 30 minutes later, Alaric walked into the police station to find Serafina sitting in Detective Santos's office, her hands stained with cerulean blue paint, her usually perfect hair falling loose from its ponytail. She looked up when he entered, and he saw something in her expression that he hadn't seen in months. Fire. How is this my life? She asked, gesturing to the sterile police office around them. How is it that I can't retrieve a change of clothes from my own apartment without being stalked by strangers with cameras? Detective Santos, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair, looked between them sympathetically. The photographer isn't going to press charges, she said. Apparently, once we explained that he was blocking a private citizen from accessing her own building, he decided it wasn't worth pursuing. That's good news, Alaric said. But Serafina shook her head. No, it's not, don't you see? This is never going to end. Even if you sold 100 companies, even if we moved to the moon, there will always be someone with a camera, someone who thinks our private pain is public entertainment. She stood up, and Alaric could see that she'd been crying. Her emerald eyes were red-rimmed, and there were tear tracks through the paint smudges on her cheeks. I can't live like this, Alaric. More importantly, I can't raise our daughter like this. Every milestone of her life, her first steps, her first day of school, her first heartbreak will be documented by strangers and turned into content for people who don't even know her name. Sarah, I've made my decision. Her voice was steady, final. I'm moving to Portland next week as soon as Evangeline is discharged. I've already spoken to a lawyer about custody arrangements. You can see her whenever you want, but it has to be there, away from all this. Alaric felt something breaking inside his chest. What about us? There is no us, Alaric. There can't be. Because being with you means living in a fishbowl, and I won't do that to our daughter. Detective Santos quietly excused herself, leaving them alone in the small office. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything they couldn't say, everything they'd lost. I love you, Alaric said finally, the words coming out raw and desperate. I know I've made mistakes, I know I've prioritized the wrong things, but I love you more than anything I've ever built or achieved. I know, Serafina whispered, and fresh tears started falling. I love you too. That's what makes this so impossible. If I didn't love you, I could hate you for what our life became. But I do love you, and that's why I have to protect our daughter from the consequences of loving you. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. The compound in Montana. Does the offer still stand? Alaric's heart leaped. Of course. Sarah, if you're willing to. Not for us, she said quickly. For you and Evangeline. When she's older, when she wants to spend time with her father, that could be a safe place for her. Away from everything, somewhere she can just be a little girl instead of a billionaire's daughter. The hope that had flared in his chest died just as quickly as it had appeared. You're really leaving. I'm really leaving. And there's nothing I can say, nothing I can do, no gesture grand enough to change your mind. Serafina turned to face him fully, and the sadness in her expression was devastating. That's just it, Alaric. I don't want grand gestures anymore, I wanted small things. Sunday morning coffee in bed, quiet walks through the park, private conversations that stayed private. I wanted a husband, not a celebrity who happened to share my bed. She opened the door, then looked back one last time. I'll always love the man I married, the one who used to bring me wildflowers from the farmer's market and listen to me talk about art history for hours. But that man got lost somewhere along the way, buried under all the success and attention and public expectations. He's still here, Alaric said desperately. That man is still here, Sarah. Maybe he is, she said softly, but it's too late for us. I hope it's not too late for him to be the father Evangeline deserves. And then she was gone, leaving Alaric alone in a police station office, surrounded by the ruins of everything he'd thought he wanted, finally understanding what Dr. Chen had tried to tell him. Some things couldn't be fixed with money or power or grand romantic gestures. Some things could only be healed with time, patience, and the kind of quiet, consistent love he'd forgotten how to give. Evangeline's discharge day arrived with the kind of crisp October morning that painted Manhattan in shades of gold and amber. At 6 weeks old and 4 pounds, she was finally strong enough to leave the NICU that had been her entire world. But instead of celebration, the air in the hospital room was thick with the weight of goodbye. Serafina sat in the rocking chair, holding their daughter for the first time without wires and monitors attached to her tiny body. Evangeline was dressed in a soft pink outfit that Serafina had bought weeks ago, back when she'd still believed there might be a future where they could be a family together. She's so beautiful, Alaric whispered, standing beside them but not quite close enough to touch. He'd learned to maintain distance over the past week, recognizing that every gesture toward intimacy only made the impending separation more painful for both of them. She has your eyes, Serafina said softly, studying their daughter's face. Gray like storm clouds. And your mouth. See how it curves up at the corners even when she's sleeping? They spoke in hushed tones, as if raising their voices might shatter the fragile peace they'd managed to build around this moment. Outside, Alaric's security team was managing the logistics of getting Serafina and Evangeline safely to the airport without media interference. A private jet waited to take them to Portland, where Serafina's aunt had prepared a nursery in a house surrounded by trees instead of cameras. Dr. Chen entered with the final discharge papers, her expression bittersweet. Over the past 6 weeks, she'd watched this family navigate impossible circumstances, with a grace that had impressed even her experienced perspective. "Everything looks perfect," she said, reviewing Evangeline's latest tests. "She's exceeded every expectation. You should be very proud." "We are," Serafina said, unconsciously including Alaric in the statement before catching herself. Dr. Chen handed them a folder containing Evangeline's medical records, feeding schedules, and follow-up care instructions. "There's one more thing," she said, looking specifically at Alaric. "The private wing construction begins next month. The families who benefit from that space will never know your name, but they'll have what you wanted most: privacy during the most vulnerable time of their lives." Alaric nodded, throat too tight to speak. The anonymous donation had been finalized, and soon other families would have what his couldn't: the chance to navigate medical crises without public scrutiny. "It's time," Serafina said quietly, and those two words carried the weight of finality. The walk down the hospital corridor felt endless. Alaric carried the diaper bag and car seat, while Serafina held Evangeline close to her chest. The nurses they'd come to know over the past weeks offered quiet congratulations and promised to keep in touch. But everyone understood this wasn't really a celebration. At the hospital's back exit, away from any potential photographers, a black SUV waited with tinted windows. Alaric's head of security, James, stood beside it with the kind of professional efficiency that had become necessary in their lives. "The route to Teterboro is clear," James reported quietly. "No media presence detected." Serafina looked up at Alaric as they reached the vehicle. "This is it, isn't it? This is it." For a moment they stood frozen in the space between their past and their separate futures. Evangeline stirred in her mother's arms, making the soft sounds that newborns make when they're dreaming. The sound broke something loose in Alaric's chest. "Can I?" He gestured toward their daughter, and Serafina nodded, carefully transferring Evangeline into his arms. Holding his daughter felt different outside the hospital. Here, in the real world, she seemed both more fragile and more substantial. She was warm and solid and unmistakably his, and the knowledge that he wouldn't see her again for weeks, maybe months, was almost unbearable. "I promise I'll be a better father than I was a husband," he whispered to her, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise I'll learn how to love you without letting the world watch. I promise I'll figure out how to give you the quiet, safe childhood your mother wants for you." Evangeline's eyes opened then, fixing on his face with the serious expression that babies sometimes wear, as if they understand far more than they should be able to. For a moment, Alaric imagined he could see forgiveness in those gray eyes so much like his own. "She'll know you love her," Serafina said softly. "I'll make sure of that." Alaric looked up at her, memorizing the way the morning light caught the auburn strands in her hair, the constellation of freckles across her cheekbones, the elegant curve of her neck. "Will you tell her about us? About the good times?" "Of course." Serafina's voice broke slightly. "I'll tell her about the man who used to bring me wildflowers and make terrible jokes while I worked. I'll tell her about the morning you surprised me with breakfast in bed because I'd been up all night restoring a damaged painting. I'll tell her about how much we loved each other, even if we couldn't figure out how to make it work." Alaric carefully handed Evangeline back to her mother, his fingers brushing against Serafina's as he did. The touch was electric, full of everything they were walking away from. "The Montana compound," he said. "When she's old enough, when you think it's safe, will you bring her there? Will you let me show her how to ride horses and build tree houses and catch fireflies?" "Yes," Serafina said without hesitation. "She deserves to know her father, Alaric. Not the public version, but the real one, the one I fell in love with." James cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am, we should go. The flight plan is time-sensitive." Serafina nodded, then looked at Alaric one last time. "Take care of yourself. Learn how to be happy without an audience. Take care of our daughter, teach her to paint." "I will." She moved toward the SUV, then stopped. "Alaric?" "Yeah?" "The divorce papers. I signed them yesterday. My lawyer will send them to Catherine Walsh this afternoon." The words hit him like a physical blow, but he managed to nod. "I know. It's the right thing to do." "For what it's worth," she said, her voice barely audible. "In another life, in a world without cameras and shareholders and public expectations, I think we would have made it." "We would have made it in any world," Alaric replied, meaning every word. "But this is the world we have, and you're doing what's best for her." Serafina climbed into the SUV, settling Evangeline into the car seat with practiced movements. Through the tinted window, Alaric could see his daughter's tiny face, peaceful and unaware that her world was about to change completely. The vehicle pulled away smoothly, disappearing around the corner toward the highway that would take them to the airport. Alaric stood alone on the sidewalk, watching the empty street, feeling the weight of everything he'd built and everything he'd lost. His phone buzzed with a text from Viktor Kozlov. Acquisition finalized. D'Amato Technologies officially becomes Kozlov Medical. Thank you for the opportunity. Another text. This one from Catherine Walsh. Montana compound purchase complete. Deed is in your name. Security system installation begins Monday. A third text from his assistant. Board meeting canceled. All public appearances suspended indefinitely per your instructions. Alaric scrolled through the messages, watching his old life disappear in real time. By tomorrow, the name D'Amato would be scrubbed from buildings, websites, and business cards. The man who had once graced magazine covers and conference stages was systematically erasing himself from public view. But as he walked back into the hospital, not as a CEO or a billionaire or a media figure, but simply as a man who had just said goodbye to his family, Alaric realized something profound. For the first time in years, he wasn't performing for anyone. He found Dr. Wao Chen in her office, updating patient files. "I have a question," he said from the doorway. She looked up, surprised to see him. "Of course. The anonymous donation for the private wing. Would you be willing to hire a consultant? Someone who understands what families need during extended NICU stays? We'd be very interested in that kind of expertise." Alaric stepped into the office fully. "I'd like to volunteer. No pay, no recognition, no publicity. Just help other families navigate what we went through." Dr. Chen studied his face, and something in her expression softened. "Are you sure? It would mean being here regularly, seeing other couples go through similar struggles." "I'm sure," Alaric said, and for the first time in months he was absolutely certain about something. "I can't fix my own family, but maybe I can help other families stay together." As he filled out volunteer paperwork in the NICU where his daughter had fought for life, where his marriage had finally ended, and where his real journey as a father had begun, Alaric D'Amato started the long process of becoming the man he should have been all along. Outside, Manhattan buzzed with its usual energy, but inside the quiet corridors of the hospital, a different kind of life was beginning, one measured not in stock prices or media mentions, but in the steady rhythm of tiny hearts learning to beat on their own. 3 years later, the Montana sky stretched endless and blue above the compound, interrupted only by the distant peaks of the Glacier National Park mountains. Evangeline D'Amato Hale, now 3 years old with wild auburn curls and her father's storm gray eyes, chased fireflies across the meadow with the fearless determination that had carried her through her first fragile weeks of life. "Daddy, look!" she called out, her small hands cupped around a glowing insect. "I caught one." Alaric looked up from the wooden swing he'd been building, his hands now calloused from carpentry rather than softened by boardroom meetings. At 37, he looked younger somehow. The lines around his eyes came from squinting at mountain sunrises rather than staring at stock reports, and his hair had grown longer, touched with silver at the temples. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he said, setting down his tools and walking over to examine her prize. "But remember what we talked about? Fireflies need to be free to make their magic," Evangeline recited solemnly, then opened her palms. The insect flickered once and flew away, joining the constellation of lights beginning to emerge in the evening dusk. Serafina emerged from the main house carrying a tray of lemonade and sandwiches, her own appearance transformed by 3 years of quiet living in Portland. Her auburn hair was longer now, often braided with wildflowers that Evangeline picked during their walks through the Oregon countryside. She wore a simple sundress painted with tiny handprints, evidence of their latest art project together. This was Evangeline's 4th visit to the Montana compound, and each time the routine had become more natural, more comfortable. A week in the summer, a week at Christmas, and a long weekend in spring. Enough time for a little girl to know her father, but not so much that the outside world took notice. "Dinner's ready," Serafina announced, and Alaric felt the familiar flutter in his chest that her presence still caused. They had learned to be friends again, co-parents bound by their shared love for their daughter and the careful respect they'd built for each other's choices. As they settled on the porch to eat, Evangeline between them chattering about the horses she'd ridden that morning, Alaric marveled at how normal this felt, how right. There were no cameras here, no reporters, no stock prices to monitor, just fireflies and lemonade and a little girl who knew her daddy as the man who taught her to ride horses, not the former billionaire who'd once graced magazine covers. "Tell me about the hospital," Serafina said quietly while Evangeline was distracted by a butterfly landing on her sandwich. It had become their evening tradition, sharing pieces of their separate lives while their daughter played. "We had twins born at 24 weeks this month," Alaric said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who'd found his true calling. "Parents from Minnesota, first pregnancy. They were terrified, but Dr. Chen thinks both babies have excellent chances." "And you helped them?" "I stayed with the father during the surgery, made sure they understood the insurance process, connected them with the family housing program. Small things." Serafina smiled. Not small to them. Over the past 3 years, Alaric had become Mount Sinai's most dedicated volunteer, spending 3 days a week in the NICU, helping other families navigate the terrifying world of premature birth. He'd also quietly funded similar programs at hospitals across the country, always anonymously, always focused on practical support rather than publicity. "How's your gallery showing going?" Alaric asked. "Sold out opening night," Serafina said with quiet pride. "Turns out there's a real market for art restoration workshops. People love learning how to bring beautiful things back to life." She'd built a new career in Portland, teaching art restoration at the community college and running weekend workshops in her studio. The work was fulfilling in a way that private commissions for wealthy collectors had never been, and she'd found peace in the rhythm of small-town life where she was known simply as Eva's mom, rather than anyone's ex-wife. "Daddy, can we catch more fireflies?" Evangeline asked, having finished her sandwich and grown restless with adult conversation. "Just a few more," Alaric said, checking his watch. "Then it's time for your bath." As Evangeline ran back into the meadow, her laughter echoing across the valley, Serafina and Alaric sat in comfortable silence. The compound had become a sanctuary for all of them, a place where Evangeline could simply be a child, where Serafina could relax her vigilant protection of their privacy, and where Alaric could practice being the father he'd always wanted to be. "She asked me something yesterday," Serafina said suddenly, "about why Mommy and Daddy don't live in the same house." Alaric tensed. They'd always known this conversation was coming, but 3 seemed young for such complex explanations. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that sometimes people love each other very much but live better lives apart, and that the most important thing is that both Mommy and Daddy love her more than anything in the world." "And she accepted that?" "She asked if that meant she gets 2 houses with her own room in each one. When I said yes, she seemed to think that was pretty great." They laughed quietly, marveling at their daughter's ability to find joy in situations that had once seemed impossibly complicated. "Sarah," Alaric said carefully, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him, noting the serious tone. "There's a documentary crew that's been trying to reach me. They want to do a piece about former tech executives who left the industry. They've been very persistent." Serafina's expression tightened. "And I'm going to do it." "Alaric, hear me out," he said quickly. "It would be completely on my terms. No personal details about you or Evangeline. No discussion of our marriage or divorce. Just me talking about why I chose to step away from corporate life and what I'm doing now. Why would you want to put yourself back in the spotlight?" Alaric was quiet for a moment, watching their daughter chase fireflies against the backdrop of mountains and sky. "Because there are other people out there making the same mistakes I made. Other parents prioritizing the wrong things. Other couples losing themselves in public expectations. If sharing my story helps even one family make better choices." Serafina studied his profile, seeing echoes of the man she'd married, the one who'd always wanted to help people, who'd genuinely believed technology could make the world better. But there was a wisdom in his face now, a hard-earned understanding of what actually mattered. "No mentions of us," she said firmly. "No hints about where we live or how often you see Evangeline. None. Catherine has already drawn up very specific guidelines. And if they push for more personal details, then I walk away. My priority isn't the documentary, Sarah. It's protecting the life we've built for our daughter." Before Serafina could respond, Evangeline came running back, her small hands glowing with captured fireflies. "Look, I caught a whole family," she announced proudly. "A whole family," Alaric repeated, kneeling down to her level. "That's pretty special. Can we keep them?" "What did we learn about keeping fireflies?" Serafina asked gently. Evangeline sighed dramatically, the expression so like her father's that both parents had to suppress smiles. "They need to be free to make their magic." "That's right, baby. Some things are more beautiful when they're free." Evangeline opened her hands and the fireflies spiraled up into the darkening sky, their lights blinking like tiny stars. She watched them go with the solemn satisfaction of a child who understood that love sometimes meant letting go. Later that night, after Evangeline had been bathed and read to and tucked into her bed in the compound's guest house, Alaric and Serafina sat on the porch swing he'd finally finished building. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the sounds of night creatures and the distant call of an owl. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices earlier?" Alaric asked. "If I'd understood what you needed before we got to the breaking point." "Sometimes," Serafina admitted, "but I've learned not to live in hypotheticals. This is the life we have, and in a lot of ways, it's a good one. Separate but connected." "Separate but connected," she agreed. "Co-parents who respect each other, friends who share the most important thing in our lives." "Is that enough for you, this arrangement?" Serafina was quiet for a long moment, watching the last of the fireflies blink out among the trees. 3 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. Now I have a daughter who laughs like you and creates like me, a career that fulfills me, and the knowledge that her father will always be there for her. It's not the life I planned, but it's a good life." "And what about love? What about the future? What about it? Don't you want to find someone, build a new family?" Serafina smiled, and in the moonlight, Alaric could see echoes of the young woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "I loved you completely, Alaric. The kind of love that changes you permanently. I'm not looking to replace that or recreate it. I'm learning to be grateful for what it gave me and what it taught me." They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, until Serafina stood to go inside. "The documentary," she said from the doorway. "If you think it might help other families, then you should do it. Just be careful with our story, even the parts you don't tell directly." After she'd gone inside, Alaric remained on the swing, looking out at the vast Montana landscape that had become his refuge and his home. His phone sat silent beside him. No urgent emails, no emergency board meetings, no crisis management needed. Tomorrow he would fly back to New York and spend 3 days in the NICU, helping other families navigate their most difficult moments. At the end of the week, he would return here, to the quiet and the fireflies and the swing he'd built with his own hands. It wasn't the life he'd planned either, but it was the life he'd chosen. And sometimes, Alaric reflected as he watched the last firefly of the evening blink out among the stars, the best magic happened when you learn to let beautiful things be free. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, and the sound echoed across the valley like a promise that some kinds of love endure, even when they transform, even when they take shapes we never expected. What would you have done in Alaric's position? Would you have given up everything for a chance to save your family, or found a different way to balance love and ambition? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.